Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Diplomatic Enclave. I'm your host, Numa Khalid Butt. The High Commissioner who I will be in conversation with today belongs to a country that is the second largest in the world, just behind Russia. It is also North America's earliest undisputed evidence of human activity. 20,000-year-old stone tools and animal bones have been found in caves in that country. They have also made many important inventions, and let me cite just some of them. That include kerosene, that include the electron microscope, the electronic organ, insulin, that is so very important for diabetic patients, the IMAX film system, we all are cinema buffs, aren't we, the snowmobile, and the electric cooking range. Canada also contains 9% of the world's renewable water supply. It is a major consumer and producer of cheese. We all love that around the world. And one of the lakes in that country, that is the Manitou Lake, that is located on a Manitoulin Island in Lake Huron, is the world's largest lake within a lake. Such important features, interesting features, belong only to one country, that is Canada. And my guest today in this very episode is the High Commissioner of Canada, His Excellency, Mr. Perry John Calderwood. Excellency, thank you very much to have joined us.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for such a warm welcome.
You're about to leave Pakistan soon, Excellency. In your words, how has your tenure been?
Well, you are correct. Sadly, I will be leaving Pakistan within the next month or two. The tour of duty is coming to an end. I've been in Pakistan for 2 years and had a very enjoyable and productive stay here in Pakistan. I've had the opportunity to travel throughout your beautiful country. I've visited all of the provinces. I've had the opportunity to meet with literally thousands of Pakistanis from all walks of life, from your politicians to your business people to students to people in the countryside, farmers, and everyone without exception has received me very, very well and very warmly. I've been extremely impressed with the tremendous diversity of Pakistan and the great cultural and historical heritage of your beautiful country. Also, it's been a great privilege to be Canada's High Commissioner in Pakistan because our two countries, of course, have a friendship that dates back since the earliest days of Pakistan's independence. So it's a very broad and rich relationship. And as Canada's High Commissioner, I've had the privilege of being at the center of the ongoing efforts to strengthen and build that relationship even further.
All right, when you talk about strengthening and building relationship between Pakistan and Canada, how do you feel you've been able to achieve that or improve on that during your tenure as High Commissioner?
Well, let me mention some of the areas where we've been most active, perhaps starting with trade relations. I'm delighted that in 2016, for the first time, Canada's trade with Pakistan exceeded $1 billion US. It's still a figure I would like to see much higher. I think there's potential for more growth, but certainly during my tenure and in recent years, there's been an upward trend of more and more Canadian businesses seeing opportunities in Pakistan and expressing an interest in exploring them, and growing numbers of Pakistanis interested in doing business with Canada. On the development side, we have a significant development program, and we can talk about it in greater depth, but I've been delighted that Canada's been at the forefront of efforts to support Pakistan in the eradication of polio, among other development priorities. We have strong political ties. In any relationship, the contact between political level ministers and parliamentarians is very important. In February of this year, the former Minister of Commerce of Pakistan, Minister Malik, visited Canada, Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal. In April, we had a group of 7 Canadian parliamentarians visit Pakistan. They spent a week here and had a wonderful program and learned a lot about your country and our bilateral relationship. And since then, we've had a visit of Senator Manviwala and other senators to Canada. That was in June. So we're seeing an intensification of these political level contacts, which I'm sure will help give new momentum to the relationship. Another part of the relationship which is so important is what we call the people-to-people ties. In Canada, we have hundreds of thousands of Canadians of Pakistani heritage. Every year, Pakistan figures among the leading source countries of immigrants to Canada. So we literally have hundreds of thousands of people who have strong ties and connections to both countries. And those people are very helpful in building the business relationship, the cultural ties, and the political ties as well between our two countries. I should also add that we have more than 4,000 Pakistani students in Canada, and that number has been growing with each passing year. So when you put all these things together, it creates a very rich and diverse and a very positive relationship between our two countries. And looking forward, I'm very optimistic that the relationship will continue to grow to the benefit of both countries.
Another thing that is common between our two countries is democracy and democratic values. Now, Pakistan is going through a democratic change for the third time. We are going to have our elections on the 25th of July this year. How important is democracy for a country like Canada, and in your point of view, for a country like Pakistan?
Well, let me speak first about Canada. We are a democracy. We've been a democratic country since our founding 151 years ago. We're proud and pleased that we've had 151 years of democracy without any interruption. We've never had a government overthrown. We've never had an opposition party not accept the outcome of an election. It's been 151 years of electoral democracy. Elections are an important part of any democracy, but there's more to democracy than that. Ultimately, democracy means that the people ruling us are chosen by us, and they serve us. They serve to meet the needs of the population. So other important elements of democracy beyond elections include respect for human rights, the rule of law, independent court system, which treats everyone the same way, transparency in government, so the citizens see how our governments and our leaders are spending our funds, and accountability is so important. Our parliamentarians, our ministers, our leaders are accountable to us. They're responsible to us, responsive to us, the people. And if we're not satisfied with their performance when election day comes, we can vote for others to replace them. I'm very much looking forward to Pakistan's elections coming up in the days ahead. I do believe that it will be an opportunity for Pakistan to further build and consolidate its democracy. I mentioned earlier that I've traveled widely in Pakistan and spoken to thousands of Pakistanis. One thing that I've observed, which is obvious to me, is that Pakistanis have a very strong democratic vocation. They believe in democracy, they want to be democratic, they want to choose their leaders, and they want all of the things that I've just described. They want rule of law, they want respect for human rights, they want transparency in government. So again, I think the elections coming up in a few days' time will be a step forward in Pakistan's democratic consolidation, and I'm optimistic that looking further beyond the elections, Pakistan's democracy will continue to be strengthened and to flourish. And I really believe that's what the people of Pakistan want, and it's what they believe in.
All right. Democracy is what Canada believes in because it itself is a democratic country since more than 100 years. I'm in conversation with the Canadian High Commissioner, Excellency Calderwood. We'll be back after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Diplomatic Enclave. I'm your host, Khalid, but in conversation with the Canadian High Commissioner, Excellency Perry John Calderwood. Now, Mr. Calderwood, Canada, it's a federation that is composed of 10 provinces and 3 territories. How is all of this governed, and how do you feel all of this governance is different from how Pakistan is governed?
Well, you are correct. Canada is in fact a federation, and we have been a federation since we were founded as a country in 1867. I would say we're one of the most decentralized countries in the world, and as you correctly mentioned, we have a federal government, and then we have provincial governments and local governments as well. But according to our constitution, there is a clear division of responsibilities between the federal government and the provinces. The provinces have jurisdiction for certain areas, such as delivery of education, healthcare. They have jurisdiction over the natural resources contained in their province. The federal government, for its part, is responsible for defense, for national security, for foreign policy. And then there are a number of areas where there's a shared responsibility between the two levels of government. In my opinion, it's a very good model for a country like Canada because as you mentioned at the outset, we're a very large country, the second largest in the world. We're physically large, but we're also diverse. The people are different in different parts of the country. The economy varies. The sectors of the economy that are strong vary from one province to the other. So in that context, I think it is a good system in that many of the responsibilities of government are devolved to the provincial level, so the decision makers, the governments are closer to the people rather than a very distant capital deciding everything, policies on every matter. So as I said, we have been a federation since the beginning. I think on the whole, Canadians believe that this is a very good system for our country. Over time, there have been slight adjustments to the balance of responsibilities between the different levels of government to take into account changing circumstances and evolving thinking. But on the whole, Canada very much is a federation, and we're very attached to this approach whereby the provinces have jurisdiction for many responsibilities. Many of the services provided to people are delivered at the provincial and local governments, and then the federal government deals with broad issues that affect all of the people of the country. There's certain parallels with Pakistan. I'm aware that Pakistan a few years ago amended its constitution.
With the 18th Amendment.
The 18th Amendment, that's correct, to devolve certain responsibilities to the provinces. In my experience, and I've served in a number of different countries around the world and studied different countries, I think each country has to work out what system works best for its own circumstances. But I do think that a country like Pakistan, since it also is very large, it's not geographically as big as Canada, but in terms of population, you're 6 times larger than us. There are more than 200 million Pakistanis. Canadians are only 37 million. So you have a very large population. You have diversity. As I said, I've traveled throughout the country. Sindh is very different from Gilgit-Baltistan or Punjab or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan. Each province is very distinct. People speak different languages. The economy is different in each region. So I think a case can be made to looking carefully at what responsibilities of government are most effectively managed at the level of the provinces and which ones are most effectively managed at the federal level. But again, I repeat, each country has to work out for itself according to its needs, which is the best model. But I'm just saying in principle, I think for large countries, whether we're large physically like Canada or large in population like Pakistan, there's something to be said for devolving certain responsibilities to the provincial level so that the decisions are being taken close to the people rather than in a distant
and that makes
city.
people happier because the decisions are taken quicker than they could have been if it's on a federal level.
Absolutely. And furthermore, given the differences between the provinces, one province might adopt one certain policy or approach for a particular problem that is quite different from another province because of the unique characteristics of that particular province. Interestingly, I mentioned a few moments ago that we had a delegation of Pakistani senators who visited Canada a few months ago, and actually they were invited by a non-governmental organization called the Forum of Federations, which was actually founded in Canada. And that organization brings together federations from around the world, and they study and share experiences between them. Because when you look around the world, in fact, there are many, many federations. Germany, India, Pakistan, Switzerland, Brazil. There are many countries, especially larger countries, that grapple with the challenges of finding the right way to organize government. So this particular organization focuses specifically on sharing experiences, sharing expertise on best practices so that Canada can learn from Pakistan or from Germany or Brazil, and Pakistan can learn from Canada and the other countries as well. We can learn what doesn't work well, what does work well, what might
and then
be
adapt
applicable
it
to
to
our
the
country,
environment, exactly.
and adapt it to the local circumstances of the environment.
Excellency, you talk about sharing responsibilities, sharing experiences. Before we come to that, let's talk about two things that you talked about, hospitality and economy. The Canadians are quite hospitable. I also saw that in you when I came here to interview you and how your staff treats people. There's a lot of respect in the Canadians, and this is respect also goes forward to all those people who work for the Canadian organizations. When you visit different areas in Pakistan, do you find the same hospitality in the Pakistani people?
Well, I must say that I've been received very, very well in Pakistan, and I knew this before I arrived in Pakistan because I've had Pakistani friends in other countries, including in Canada, that there's a really strong and rich tradition of hospitality in your country. And I think it's something that all Pakistanis should be proud of. For diplomats who are posted here, we are received very, very well by Pakistani officials, but also by Pakistani people in general from all walks of life. I know that visitors who come here as well, whether it's tourists or business people, they're received very, very warmly. So I think it's one of the many things that Pakistanis can be very, very proud of, that culture of hospitality and welcoming outsiders. It makes our adaptation to living or visiting Pakistan very easy when people are so warm and friendly towards us as foreigners.
Why, should I ask, is Canada and its people so hospitable? Because there are countries that are and there are those that aren't. You aren't as much of a tropical country, for example, as Pakistan is. A lot of people say we are hospitable because it's a tropical country, we've got the 4 seasons. In Canada, what makes people happy? What makes people share that happiness with each other?
Well, that's a question I've not been asked before, but perhaps the best answer I could give is that Canada is largely a country of immigrants, of immigration. Over the years and over the centuries, many people have come to Canada, and people continue to come to Canada, about 350,000 a year. So we do have a very strong tradition of welcoming newcomers, because all of us, either ourselves or our parents or our grandparents or further back, at one point arrived with nothing in many cases, or without knowing many people, and they were accepted and integrated into the society, and that tradition continues today. So that may be
one of the reasons.
part of the answer.
All
yes.
right. Well, coming back to economy, when it comes to Canada, you're the world's largest economy since 2015, and a highly globalized one. What are the important sectors of the Canadian economy, and what works best for the Canadian system?
Well, if you look at our economy historically, in the early years, in the early centuries of our country and the colonies that later became our country, in the early days we were very much a primary resources country. Our economy was largely based on agriculture, forestry, mining, fisheries, extracting natural resources from the ground. And some people still think of Canada in those terms. However, in the last 40 or 50 years, we've seen a tremendous diversification. And if you were to visit Canada today, you would find that those sectors that I've mentioned, they're still important, they're still significant, but we also have a very robust high-tech sector, ICT, information and communications technology. We have a huge automobile industry, aircraft industry, a very successful and well-managed banking sector and finance. We have tourism, manufacturing of many kinds. So we really are a very diversified economy. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking about federalism, Canada's economy varies from one province to the other. We have one province in the west, Alberta, which is known as an oil-producing province. So that particular province relies very heavily on the oil sector. We have some other provinces, or some parts of provinces, where mining or forestry is very important. On the other hand, if you go to the big cities, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, you will find that in the cities, the economy is largely based on high tech, on manufacturing, on finance and insurance and other services. So today we really have a very, very diverse economy, and I think that's a very good thing, because looking around the world, when you see countries that are too heavily dependent on one or two sectors, the economies of those countries suffer when that sector is not doing well, when the price of a particular commodity falls, for example. Whereas in Canada, we're a big oil producer, for example, we feel the pinch, especially in Alberta, when the price of oil goes down. but other parts of the country are busy producing helicopters and airplanes and managing banks and engineering firms and forestry and so forth. So we have good diversity, which protects us to a considerable extent to fluctuations in the price of oil or particular minerals or other products.
When you talk of economic diversity, how much of a surplus do you make in your different sectors that you export to different countries? And what are the different elements or material that you import from the countries? And which are the countries in the world, speaking of that, that you have a strong economic relationship with?
Well, we very much are a trading country, and we have been since the very earliest days. Part of the reason for that is, despite the fact that you quoted that we're the 11th largest economy or thereabouts, there are different measures, but we're around there, we're still relatively small compared to the big players globally. And I'm talking about the United States, which has an economy about 10 times the size of ours, a population 10 times larger, the European Union, Japan, and China. We live in a world of very big economic units, if you look at the European Union as a unit. So our domestic market is relatively small when you compare it to those big actors. So in that context, since our very earliest days, we've very much focused on exporting to take advantage of the larger markets of the world. So today about 37% of our economy is accounted for by exports.
All right.
Which is high compared to most other Western countries. So we're very dependent on trade, but we also very much benefit from trade. In terms of our main partners, our biggest partner is the United States, which of course is right next door to us. As I said, it's a huge economy, about 10 times the size of ours. And as you probably know, there is a free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico that's been in place since the early 90s. So most trade is done without tariffs or barriers. So about 75% of our trade would be with the United States. But we also have important trading relationships with Europe, with Japan. China has become very important in recent years as that economy has grown. But also, I'm very pleased to see that Canadian business people are looking at Pakistan and other emerging markets. I think the Canadian private sector realizes that in addition to diversifying what we produce and what services we provide, it's also important to diversify in terms of where we're doing business and ensure that we're seizing opportunities that appear in different parts of the world. And a country like Pakistan is one that I think has great potential in the years ahead, given the size of your population, the fact that Pakistan is achieving sustained growth. And I think there's a lot of complementarity with Canadian expertise and experience. In terms of what we trade, with the United States and Mexico in particular, we trade a great diversity of things. And there are some products like automobiles. We have a very important automobile sector in Canada, but the supply chain is highly integrated within North America. So the typical motor car made in North America, whether it's labeled Canadian, American, or Mexican, parts of that car will have been made in all three countries. And sometimes the vehicle itself might start in the United States and then go to Canada for parts to be added on, and then go back to the States or maybe to Mexico. So it's very, very integrated in that sector and in a lot of other manufacturing sectors. We do export high-tech and manufactured goods, but as I was saying earlier, Canada continues to be strong in the primary sectors. So we are an important oil exporter. We export a lot of agricultural products, wheat and oil seeds, a lot of oil seeds to Pakistan. We export lumber. And
what about cheese?
Some cheese also, and yeah, also mineral products, of course. We're a very strong mining country, so a wide range of minerals. So it's very diverse, and we also import a diversity of things from Pakistan, and we import a lot of textiles, for example.
You see, to do trade with any country, whether you export or import, it's very important to have a peaceful environment in that country. How important is peace, international security, or national security and peace for Canada, and how important has been your role in promoting international peace and security?
Well, I agree entirely that international peace and security are important for development and for economic development and trade, in addition, obviously, for stability and the welfare of the people in the country itself. Canada has a long tradition of supporting international peace and security. In 1957, which seems like a long time ago, Pakistan was just a young country back then, our foreign minister at the time, and he was later our prime minister, Lester Pearson, won the Nobel Prize for spearheading the international effort to set up the peacekeeping force, the UN peacekeeping force in the Suez. There was the Suez crisis, conflict between Egypt and Israel, France and Britain. He won a Nobel Prize for that, and he is seen as one of the leading authors of the modern concept of UN peacekeeping. So we continue to be active in UN peacekeeping operations. Just a few months ago, Canada announced a major contribution to the peacekeeping operation in Mali in West Africa. It's an aviation task force that we're providing aircraft and helicopters to help the UN maintain the fragile peace in that country. But I also want to take this opportunity to mention that Pakistan has become in recent years one of the leading troop contributors to UN peacekeeping operations. And I want to commend Pakistan for that. It's a tremendous contribution that Pakistan is making. Pakistani troops have served and are serving in a number of theaters around the world and really contributing to the international UN efforts to bring peace to countries that have experienced conflict recently.
When it comes to peace, equality can't be far behind, because you only do trade or you only build a society in which there is equality. Canada believes a lot in gender equality, also in women empowerment. A lot of your important posts in Canada are held by women. How has this developed over the years in Canada, gender equality and women empowerment?
Well, I will say, firstly, I think inclusiveness is so important in any country in order to achieve the country's potential and development. And I think something Canada has done well, not perfectly, but I think we've done well in building an inclusive society where immigrants, people from different parts of the world, people speaking different languages, different religions, different genders, are all welcomed and able to contribute to the country's development, and where we have social programs in place to protect those who are unemployed, who are ill, and so forth, so that they don't fall into extreme poverty. With regard to gender equality in particular, it is one of the top priorities of our current government in Canada. You may be aware that our cabinet of ministers at the federal level, half of them are women and half are men.
Exactly, that's why I said the posts are held by women.
And very important posts, our foreign minister, our minister for the environment, other very important portfolios are held by women. And it's because our government and our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, personally believe so strongly in gender equality. And they believe that it's important because for any country to achieve its potential, it's important that we benefit from the talents and the expertise of everyone, men and women. Historically in Canada, as in almost probably all countries around the world, women have tended to be marginalized and not been full participants in politics and in economic development. So our government is committed domestically and internationally to try to facilitate and encourage full access of women to political power and to economic leadership. So politically, I think we're doing quite well with a cabinet that is characterized by gender balance. In the private sector, we're not moving quite as quickly. Women are still a relatively small minority in corporate boardrooms in Canada. But I think the movement is in a positive direction. Internationally, Canada last year announced a feminist international assistance policy, and that was as the result of a very detailed study and review of our existing international assistance policy. And it is called that because the most important finding of our review was that if there's one thing that can really stimulate and boost development around the world, it is the full participation of women in the development of countries. So here in Pakistan and in many other countries where we have development assistance programs, we're putting a particular emphasis on programming that is designed to help and encourage and promote the participation of women, both in political life and in the economic life and all spheres of activity.
Before I move to the next question, I just wanted to commend you on Justin Trudeau, because you talked about inclusion. I feel there couldn't be anybody who supports inclusion more than Justin Trudeau, because you see him opening the fast with the Muslims during Ramzan. You see him celebrating Hindu festivals. You see him going to other communities, other ethnicities. It's very important for a head of a country to make all the people that are part of his country feel at home and feel that they can relate to him. And I think that's a high point for a government such as yours. Now, of course, after that little note, I'd like to pass to the next question. Climate change in this current scenario is very important. Even for a country like Pakistan, we are plagued with an issue that is related to water, and there's a huge tendency that water is going to be depleted in the coming years, so the government is doing its best to start building dams. Now, how important is climate change, polar issues and conservation in general to Canada, and how important has your actionism been nationally and internationally in this regard?
Well, climate change also is a very high priority for our government. Our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was at the Paris conference a couple of years ago. It was just 2 or 3 weeks after he was elected as Prime Minister, but he personally went over and spent a number of days there with our Environment Minister, and Canada played a very active role in negotiating the Paris Accord. We're very strongly committed to implementing the Paris Accord. There's a meeting coming up this December, a conference of all of the parties to consider further concrete steps to translate the goals set at the Paris Treaty into more concrete action. We're very engaged in this because we do see climate change as a tremendous threat to Canada and to the people around the world. And as you've mentioned, Pakistan too is a country that is very vulnerable to the impact of climate change. In the case of Canada, one of our greatest concerns is our northern areas, the Arctic, which is frozen for much of the year. And we are seeing with climate change, global warming, that the ice flows and the ice caps are melting. The winter is getting shorter each year, and this is having a real direct impact on the lifestyle and the livelihoods of the Indigenous people in the north. And it also opens up a lot of other potential issues, such as companies and countries going to the Arctic to mine under the seabed in areas which until now really have been out of bounds because they've been covered by ice. So there's a lot of reasons for Canada to be concerned about global warming in terms of our own country, but we're also deeply concerned about the impact on other countries, such as Pakistan. And we've seen in recent weeks how warm it can become and the potential impact this can have on people and on their livelihoods, and especially the water supply. If it begins to dwindle, it can have a huge impact. So Canada is focusing a lot of our development programming in different parts of the world on mitigating the impact of climate change. In Canada, our federal government and our provinces are working together to try to find ways to reduce Canada's carbon footprint and to meet our goals under the Paris Accord. But it's clear, I think, to everyone that this is it's a long haul. We all have to work together, and all of the major countries of the world have to achieve progress in reducing their emissions in order for us collectively to achieve our goals, because climate change is one of these issues which it can't be dealt with individually. It's global warming. It's not just the warming doesn't take place in one country or the other. It's the climatic patterns are global and international by nature. So I think in the years and decades ahead, it's going to continue to be a very high priority
and a challenge.
And a challenge for all of us. And the consequences could be very, very serious if we don't get on top of this and our governments show real leadership in reducing emissions and making the transition to economies that are producing less carbon, which leads to the global warming.
All right. Global warming is important, but you, in the beginning of this answer, talked about the indigenous people that live in the Arctic areas, which brings me to the next question. What are the different kinds of ethnicities that are present in Canada? You talked about a lot of people who have immigrated from different areas of the world and brought their culture, their traditions to Canada. How many languages are spoken in Canada, and what kind of actions are taken by the Canadian government, whether at the local, regional or federal level, to conserve these traditions, these languages of the different ethnicities that live there?
Well, in ethnic terms, we're one of the most diverse countries in the world. Toronto is our largest city, and over 50% of the population of Toronto was born outside of Canada. Many of them in Pakistan, but others in China or Vietnam, Philippines, Mexico, all over the place. So if you visit, especially a large Canadian city, you will see this tremendous diversity, and you will hear many languages spoken. Looking at it historically, the original inhabitants of Canada, we call them the First Nations, or the Makamilok, the indigenous people.
All right.
The First Nations, they were there before the European settlers and colonists started to come over.
And of course, I also talked in my intro about how we found evidence, the earliest evidence of an habitation in North America 20,000 years ago.
20,000 years ago. So the indigenous people and their ancestors have been there for a very long time. Today, Indigenous Canadians, First Nations, are a small percentage of the population, around 3 or 4%. Since the 1500s, Canada was initially a French colony, so French settlers came over. Subsequently, it was a British colony. British settlers came over. And in the last century or so, Canada has received immigrants from all parts of the world. But given that history, we have English and French as our two official languages, with French predominant in certain parts of the country, especially the province of Quebec, English dominant in other parts, but federally they're both official languages, and the federal government works in the two languages. We also have about 60 indigenous languages from these First Nations people. Sadly, most of these languages are spoken by very small numbers of people. As I said, the indigenous people are only 3 or 4% of the population, and in the early years of the colonization, a lot of damage was sadly done to the culture of indigenous people. So we have about 60 languages, but most of them are spoken by very small numbers. And it's a very big challenge for those communities themselves, but also with the support of government authorities to seek ways to keep those languages alive. And of course, that's a challenge around the world. We live in a globalized world where the big languages, English and French and Spanish, and well, Urdu is a big language as well, Mandarin, these languages tend to dominate, and there's a risk that smaller languages get squeezed out and smaller cultures disappear. There's the same issue, of course, in Pakistan, and I followed the debate about concern people have about small language communities fading away and people being assimilated. So we don't have magic answers to this, but it is something that Canadians are aware of, and I hope that we can find ways supporting those communities themselves to keep those languages and cultures alive, because it's part of the heritage of all of humanity. We also have immigrant languages, of course, people who come from, whether it's Pakistan or Italy or Mexico or wherever, they bring their languages and their cultures to Canada. And it basically means that to be a Canadian, you don't have to be speak this language and have this faith and dress in this way. It means whatever your culture is, you're welcome and viewed as a Canadian, and you should be proud and feel encouraged to maintain your own traditions while at the same time integrating with the mainstream Canadian society.
When you talk of diversity, how can we not talk about religious diversity, which is one of the most important features of Canada? You believe a lot in pluralism. Now, how important, in your point of view, sir, is that to your government?
Well, I think it's an extension of what I've just described in terms of multiculturalism. Our government, and I would say our people collectively, have recognized that we can all be proud Canadians even though we have different religions, we may speak different languages at home, we may dress in a different way. Some of us may eat spicy food and other people bland food, and so forth. But the religious diversity is part of that broader diversity of the country. Canada historically was a predominantly Christian country, but with immigrants coming from so many parts of the world, if you visit a Canadian city today like Toronto or Calgary or Montreal, you will see mosques, you will see synagogues, you will see Sikh and Hindu temples, as well as Christian churches of different denominations, and other people of no religion at all, but we all accept each other and respect each other. As you mentioned earlier, our Prime Minister often will visit mosques or temples on special days of the year for the particular religion, and I think symbolically that's an indication of the recognition by our political leadership that all Canadians, regardless of our faith or our background, are equally Canadians, and we all enrich the country with our diversity.
I think that's very important, diversity for any country, for the people to feel respected and to feel safe and comfortable in an environment. That is how a country develops, and that is how, in my point of view, sir, Canada has also developed. Now, Canada, speaking of different religions and ethnicities, and we talked about the immigrants that have formed part of Canada. Now, Canada for years has always been known as a country that has welcomed refugees who have fled conflict zones or persecution in their home countries. Now, how has your country, once they've arrived in Canada, accepted and successfully integrated refugees into your system and your country?
As I mentioned earlier, Canada receives around 300 to 350,000 immigrants a year, and a significant number of those are refugees. I think Canadians, myself included, are very proud of our long tradition of accepting refugees and welcoming them to our country. And I'm also very proud that I think we've been very successful in integrating refugees into Canadian society. I'll speak to a particular example which is recent to describe how we manage the intake of refugees. Canada in the last 2 years has received more than 50,000 refugees from Syria, a country which, as your viewers will know, has gone through terrible conflict and upheaval in recent years. So Canada, bearing its moral responsibility as a member of the international community, has welcomed over 50,000 Syrians to come to Canada, and we've resettled them there. Roughly half of these people have been sponsored by the government of Canada. So the government itself has looked after bringing these people to Canada and provided support to settling them in. But the other interesting aspect of our refugee policy is we also have a system in place whereby private groups of citizens can sponsor a refugee family. And nearly half the refugees from Syria have been sponsored by groups of Canadians. You're probably thinking, who are these groups?
Of course.
Well, it can be any group of people, but often they're a group of people who attend the same church or mosque or synagogue. They could be several neighbors living on the same street. They could be a few families who are friends with each other. Any group of people, such as the ones I've described or any other, can form an association. It has to raise enough money to support the family for the family's first year in Canada, the refugee family. And then they approach the government, and the government will allow them to bring a family of refugees from Syria to Canada. But the other important part of this arrangement is that in addition to providing the financial support for the first year, they also provide the moral and emotional support. So when the family of Syrian refugees arrives in Canada, most of them don't speak English or French, they speak Arabic. They're welcomed by the sponsoring group, the group of 10 or 20, 30 people who help them learn to speak our languages, help them to learn to speak English and French, help the adults find employment, help the children enroll in school. They take the families to medical appointments, and they spend time with them. They welcome them. We were talking about hospitality earlier in the context of Pakistan. They literally invite the people to their homes. They serve them Canadian food. This model has been very successful in ensuring successful integration of refugees, because these people are not on their own in Canada. They have this support network. From the day they arrive, they're met at the airport. Our Prime Minister himself, on a couple of occasions, has gone to the airport to meet the people. And it's one of the things that has made refugee integration into Canada a very successful model. And in fact, some other countries around the world that accept refugees have in fact approached our government and studied our model because it has been so successful.
All right. Speaking of helping people, Canada is also known for assisting countries in need, humanitarian assistance, that is. Let's move to Pakistan and Canada relations. Now, Canada has provided humanitarian assistance to Pakistan in the times of need. What else is your development program in Pakistan focused on, apart from humanitarian assistance to Pakistan?
We do in fact have a significant development program in Pakistan, and we have had one since the 1950s. Over the years, the priority sectors change. At the present time, I'll just mention 3 areas where we're particularly active. One, which I touched on, I mentioned before, the campaign to eradicate polio. Canada, over the last 20 years, has been one of the leading international donors in efforts to eradicate polio from the world, from the entire world. Today, there are just 3 or 4 countries left in the world where the polio virus continues to be transmitted, and Pakistan is one of them. So we've provided, and we are providing, very significant funding, working with the government of Pakistan, but also working through UN agencies like the World Health Organization and UNICEF to fund the campaigns to inoculate all of the children of Pakistan against polio. The good news is, if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, we'd be talking about thousands of cases every year of polio in Pakistan.
Now that is significantly reduced.
Well, that's what I was going to say. 20 years ago it would have been thousands. If we were talking 10 years ago, it would have been hundreds. Today we're talking about 8 or 10 cases a year. We're very, very close to that objective of zero transmission. It's an elusive goal, but I'm confident that we're going to reach it sometime very soon, hopefully within the next year or 2. So Canada's been a major contributor. We're not the only ones doing it, of course. I mentioned the UN agencies. I think the Pakistani government has shown very strong leadership also, and other organizations such as the Gates Foundation and other donor countries have made contributions as well. But that's been one of our priorities in Pakistan in the last few years. A second priority area, which we also touched on, was women's empowerment. Just recently, as an example, we launched a development program which will be worth about 20 million Canadian dollars over the next 5 years to provide funding to Pakistani NGOs that are promoting the participation of women in politics. So that's just recently been launched, but we also have some other projects, current and recent, to develop the skills of women so that they can participate more fully in the economy, entrepreneurship skills and other economic skills and training. So that's the second area. And the last one I'll mention, in recent years we've provided funding through a debt swap arrangement to strengthen and improve teacher training in public schools at the primary level. And this project, which has been going on for about a decade, is just about to come to a close. But Canada has provided more than $100 million in debt write-off, which means Pakistan had owed Canada money for development loans in the past. So Canada is writing those loans off, and in return, Pakistan is investing in teacher training and skills development to improve the quality of primary school education.
All right. I mean, these are very important sectors, but also early on you talked about business opportunities. Now, Pakistan is offering opportunities to a lot of foreign business establishments, including the Canadian businesses, which are quite serious, and the Pakistani government has been serious since the last couple of years about that. What are the sectors that the Canadian businesses are pursuing as far as investing in Pakistan is concerned? Can you name a few?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen during my time here a growing interest on the part of the Canadian private sector in Pakistan, and I think that interest will continue to grow in the years ahead, assuming, and I think this will be the case, that there continue to be further improvements in consolidating the security in Pakistan. So we are seeing interest. I'll just mention a couple of sectors. One in which the interest is very strong is that of renewable energy. Canada is very strong in energy, everything from oil and gas to wind and solar to hydroelectric, where we have tremendous experience in the energy sector. And I'm pleased to see that we do have Canadian companies making significant investments in renewable energy. Just last week, I visited Jimpir, which is a couple of hours north of Karachi, to visit a wind farm, a very major investment by a Canadian company, and a very successful investment. They're doing very well, but we do have some other Canadian companies looking at wind and solar investments in Pakistan. In the area of consumer market, one success story is Second Cup. I don't know if you know the Second Cup cafes. They're Canadian.
There's a lot of cafes here.
They've been opening up cafes. I think they're up to close to 20 cafes now across the country. Another area, not so much of investment, but of exports, is the agricultural sector. I mentioned earlier, Canada exports oil seeds, canola and other seeds to Pakistan. In the ICT sector, we're seeing a lot of interest on the part of the ICT sector in both countries in exploring opportunities. In the aircraft sector as well, we're seeing Canadian companies that produce aircraft explore opportunities here. So it's really quite diverse, and I do believe that the potential is great, and we're just starting to see it take off.
All right. That's great. With the potential for the relationship to even go further over the years, you must be quite a satisfied man at the end of your tenure in Pakistan. What kind of farewell message would you like to give to the Pakistani nation and to our viewers at PTV World?
Well, I guess two messages. The first one, once again, thank you to all my many Pakistani friends and all of the Pakistani people who I've met in different contexts for such a warm welcome. I've always felt so much at home here. But secondly, I would say I want to take this opportunity to wish Pakistan well. I think your country can have a tremendous future. One of the things that has really impressed me in my travels around Pakistan and in my day-to-day work is the energy and the ambition and the creativity of the youth of Pakistan. You have a young population, a growing population, and when I meet young people, I always come out of the meetings feeling inspired and re-energized, because there is great energy and creativity there. And I think the challenge for Pakistan, for the entire society, I'm talking about the government and the private sector, NGOs, for everyone, is to find ways to open up the opportunities for all of that energy, so that the young people of Pakistan and all Pakistanis can achieve their full potential. I do believe the potential is great, the energy, the ambition is there, so the challenge is just to find ways to unleash and to open up those doors so that everyone can achieve his or her full potential in an inclusive and secure and prosperous Pakistan. So and finally, I hope to come back and visit after I leave Pakistan, because I have many friends here, and I look forward to coming back as a tourist and a visitor to see the parts of the country that I didn't get to see during my stay.
Great, Excellency Perry John Calderwood. It was a pleasure seeing you on the last leg of your tenure as High Commissioner of Canada. You've done a lot during your tenure. You've seen a lot during your tenure, and I hope that you keep on returning to Pakistan in one context or the other to keep on not only bridging the gaps between the two countries, but also strengthening the relationship that exists between Pakistan and Canada. I thank you very much, and I wish you a very happy and prosperous future.
Thank you very much, and bahut shukriya.